Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. I'm Shereen Bhan, and today we're going to focus on the recommendations that have been put forward by the NITI Aayog for the 3-year action plan by 2020 to try and improve the health of the economy. The NITI has focused on recommendations across sectors from healthcare to education to manufacturing. Joining us now to talk about some of those is the Vice Chairman of the NITI Aayog, Arvind Panagariya. Mr. Panagariya, always a pleasure speaking with you. As I pointed out, this 3-year action plan does cover pretty much the entire ambit of the Indian economy. But if I were to start by asking you about what I know to be one of your key concerns, and that is employment, employability, and within that, the whole aspect of skills development. If I could start by asking you about the recommendations that you've made there, and also where you believe programs that have already been implemented by the government, for instance, within the skills development program, what have been the shortcomings and what needs to change, what needs to improve?
You're asking wide-ranging questions, but a broad answer first, which is that, virtually every area we cover in the action agenda has a ministry that looks after that particular subject. And therefore, we ought to move along on all fronts. If each ministry were to do its job, I think we can move forward on every front. That being said, if you would insist on me stating certain priorities, I would say, as I have repeatedly said on your show before, job creation of jobs which pay good wages, that is priority number one, and that of course means manufacturing. So we need to pay special attention to manufacturing, and that also within that to labor-intensive manufacturing. And we lay out a number of policy steps that we can take to strengthen our labor-intensive manufacturing. Then we also, I would also say, big priority, which is complements this move on manufacturing. We got all the growth enablers, as we call them, in the action agenda. These would span things like infrastructure, energy, digitization, innovation and entrepreneurship. So a whole host of these things we would need to work on. And then the social sectors, education and health.
Right. Let me start by asking you specifically on the issue of skills development, sir. And I think that, through the course of your action plan, there is an acknowledgement that perhaps the skills development initiatives undertaken by the government have not necessarily worked. In fact, even if we look at the data, and this is according to the NSDC data, the placement rate of people who are actually getting skilled is under 50%. And you're suggesting that the placement rate has to be as high as 80%. Now, what has gone wrong, or what has been the shortcomings of what has been undertaken so far, and how do we bridge that gap from 50 to 80?
Right. So we have made the suggestions there. One thing I feel we need to do is to bring together the demand and supply. So, in the skill development, we need to have the industries more directly involved. That can be done, say, for example, through apprenticeship. So if we really scale up our apprenticeship programs, which can now be done actually in the context of the some of the key amendments that were made to the Apprenticeship Act, I think that will connect the demand and supply more directly, and that ought to help raise the proportion of those who are given skills that are also employed. Then also we need to align better the exact skills that are required in the marketplace, even if not through apprenticeship, but directly. We need a better sense of what is in demand, and if we do those things, I think we would certainly begin to raise our hit rate, meaning the proportion of those who get employed after being skilled.
Okay. Sir, you've also recommended a national level overseas employment promotion agency, and you believe that this should be housed under the Ministry of External Affairs. But what is it that India will need to do to ensure that this is an idea that actually takes off? And what has been the buy-in that you've got from other ministries that you've spoken to, specifically with respect to this national level overseas employment promotion agency that you've recommended?
Well, we, in the course of writing the action agenda, we have worked closely with the ministries and with the states as well. So I think, there is some basis for the recommendations we have made. Again, how far we are able to go, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, let me talk to you about education, sir. And what you talk about there is the overhauling of the University Grants Commission or the UGC Act. And I know that this has been something that NITI has been working on for a while now. When it actually goes through is a separate matter. But on the point that you talk about, that rather than micromanaging universities, you believe that there needs to be a focus on information disclosure and better governance. Now, how do you ensure that from happening? And as you've gone about preparing these recommendations, are you disappointed with the current state of affairs as far as our educational governance is concerned, the governance of our educational institutions is concerned?
Well, the short answer is yes, because, our higher education system has been in need of reform for a very long time. I've been writing on this for more than 10 years. Good news, however, is that we are actually moving on this front very quickly. There was a committee under my chairmanship, which I think has done its last meeting and will soon be submitting a report. And our report is very much, actions instead of simply laying down very, elaborate roadmaps. So we are talking about autonomy, both to the universities and to the colleges. So that is going to be a really, truly major reform, something that has not happened in a long, long time and has been long overdue. And we would recommend moving to some sort of layered regulation, whereby some of the top universities are given near full autonomy. And then we have some second category where we also give a lot more autonomy. So that's going to be a major change. This change will eventually need to be made permanent through a legislative change.
Yes.
I mean, currently we can do this change through rules, but eventually to make this permanent so that future changes in the rules do not reverse what we are suggesting, we would need a legislative change. So that means the University Grants Commission Act will have to be amended.
How confident do you feel, sir, that perhaps in the next session of Parliament we will see this legislative amendment being moved to the UGC Act itself?
No. I think I don't think we can get that sort of amendment in the next Parliament session, simply because for now we need to actually work what exactly would be the form of the new legislation, whether this will be an amendment to the existing UGC Act or we need a new legislation. So that work still needs to happen. It will have to be then vetted by the not only HRD ministry, but of course also at other levels, and then it has to go to cabinet. So that's a longer process, but the effective change will actually be put in place before that amendment, because we are doing it through the changes in the rules within the existing UGC Act.
Okay. Since we're talking about, higher education, let me also ask you about the Right to Education Act itself, sir, because there has been criticism on the Right to Education Act and how it may have encouraged enrollment, but in terms of quality, it has fallen significantly short. So what is the key recommendation when we talk about how we could perhaps make the Right to Education Act a lot more effective?
Well, a number of things need to be done. For one thing, the Right to Education Act is very input-driven kind of act, where schools are required to provide certain physical infrastructure facilities to be recognized. But I think we need to move towards more outcome-based. So that is one of the recommendations we have made. We have also, through the Right to Education Act, not allowed detention at all until all the way to the 8th grade. I think that has also had a detrimental impact on our achievement levels of the students. So we need to reintroduce detention, because remember, it existed before and the Right to Education Act had outlawed it. So that also needs to be done, and the ministry actually is already looking at that. From NITI Aayog, we have introduced something called the Education Index, which is also very outcome based, and through the Education Index we are we have already begun to monitor the states, and that will be our kind of competitive federalism kind of effort, so that the states can begin to see where do they stand relative to the other states. and that would generate some competition to improve the outcomes.
Let me move now from education to healthcare, because that's the other big focus area of your recommendations. And, previously the NITI Aayog had put forward a proposal to look at the privatization of select services within district hospitals. Now, that has come in for a fair degree of criticism. But in light of, for instance, what we've seen happen in Gorakhpur, what is it that you believe is the need of the hour to improve the public healthcare infrastructure and public healthcare systems?
Well, we need to do both, meaning public and private, because, as you know, more than 3/4 of our expenditures on health are private expenditures. These are expenditures by households. Only 1/4 is actually by the government, and till such time as we are able to raise the revenues so that the share and absolute expenditure on health by the government can be raised significantly, private sector is going to continue to be important. So that was our effort on the district hospitals, that we try to bring in the resources of the private sector as well. But you are absolutely right that public sector performance has to improve. Here, I think, once again, our approach has been input-based, and I think we again have to return to outcome-based evaluations. We have, again, here in terms of the district hospitals, we have introduced a hospital index also, which along which all the district hospitals will be evaluated and ranked. So that's, again, cooperative, competitive federalism aspect of what we are doing. But in addition, I think, we need greater accountability. The very fact that doctors who are employed by the government are frequently absent from the public health centers or community health centers simply cannot. That kind of business as usual simply cannot go on. We need to tighten up the processes so that the doctors are present.
But do you stand by your earlier recommendations, sir, of privatizing select services within district hospitals?
No, we should do that. Yes, I stand by those. It's not pure privatization. It's bringing in the resources of the private sector to complement the resources of the public sector. If you got free space, for example, in district hospitals, why should we be averse to bringing in the resources of the private sector also to boost the availability of the medical and health services? Now, you can argue about exactly how it should be done, and to ensure that you get the most bang for the buck. But certainly, as a matter of principle, we got to be able to use the energy and resources of the private sector just as much as we want to use the energy of the public sector.
The stated thrust of this government when it came to power was that the government should get out of areas that it no longer needs to run or no longer needs to be in, so get out of as many businesses as possible. And that was one of your key tasks as well. Through the thrust of your recommendations, how much are you emphasizing on the need for privatization, on the need for greater disinvestment, for the government to get out of businesses that it no longer needs to run, no longer needs to be in?
Well, on that one, our stance actually in the action agenda is quite clear. We lay down the philosophy that activities that can be done by the private sector and do not serve a public purpose, we should be willing to privatize. And along those lines, some work is already in progress. I do admit that the progress in privatization has not been as rapid as I had once hoped. But nevertheless, progress has happened. There are 17 enterprises that the cabinet has cleared for privatization, and actually the DIPAM, the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, has also appointed in most of these cases the transaction managers. And in the meantime, we also have put the Air India on the list of enterprises that ought to be privatized. So that's the 18th one. So progress has happened, maybe not as fast as I would have liked, as fast as you would have liked, but that's in the nature of things. Some things move fast, others don't. I mean, our program for closure of sick units moved much faster. There we have about 18 to 20 sick units that are in very advanced stages of closure.
Since we're talking about privatization, let me ask you about your point of view on the government's intent to now consolidate within the banking space. And like Air India, the cabinet has approved the alternative investment mechanism when it comes to PSU bank consolidation. As you leave the NITI Aayog today, sir, on the 31st, not today. What are your thoughts on the government's intention as far as public sector bank consolidation is concerned, and whether that is the right approach, for the future?
Well, I mean, this is really a finance ministry issue, but I would give you my personal answer. I think first thing we need to do is to clean up the NPAs. This is a process which is now well underway, and I'm very optimistic that we would see, action is already happening, but we would actually see the resolutions of many of these non-performing assets happening in the next 6 months. Once we have substantially cleared up the NPAs, and I think we'll also need to do some recapitalization, perhaps on a larger scale than currently proposed. But with that, I think the stage will be very much set for consolidation. I certainly believe that we need to reduce the number of banks. There are a lot of network economies of scale, and therefore which very many small banks are not able to exploit. So consolidation, I think, has to be on the cards, very much so. And I believe that this ministry, the finance ministry, is very much considering that.
Time for us to take a break, but when we return, we continue our conversation with Arvind Panagariya on the NITI Aayog's 3-year action plan for India.